Most adjectives have three forms, and the first of these is the positive form, and the positive form is the basic form of the adjective. Okay, so if you use an adjective like high, for instance, then high is the positive form. If we want to compare a couple of things, we can use the comparative form, and this would be higher. So one thing is higher than another, and we can talk here about a greater or lesser degree of something. So a greater or lesser degree of something. If we use the superlative, then we're kind of talking about the most or the least of something, and we can describe this as the greatest or the least degree of something. All right, so there we go. And in this case, it would be high, higher, and then highest. Okay. Now, if you look at this pattern here, you can kind of see what's going on here. So with the second one, we have this ER ending. And then with the superlative, we have EST. And that's a very common pattern. What we're describing here is what happens typically with adjectives that are one syllable long. So these are adjectives that are one syllable long. The other thing to notice is that the comparative is used when we're comparing two things. So this is for two items, whereas the superlative is for 3+ items. And that's where the most common grammatical mistake happens when people are using adjectives. If you were to say, for instance, which of those two, okay, let's just say two houses, which of those two houses is highest, then that sounds kind of okay, but this is actually grammatically incorrect because this should be higher. And the reason is that we're actually just comparing two things. So if we have two houses here, we'll draw a little picture here. And then we're going to say, well, which of these two is higher? And we would say, well, it's this one, right? If we have three or more houses, there we go. And there's another one over here. Then we would say, well, which of these three houses is the highest? And you can see that it would be that one. And that's the basic rule to keep in mind, that the comparative should be used for two, whereas the superlative is generally used for 3 or more. So that's it for one syllable adjectives, but of course there's lots of variation, and we'll talk about some other patterns here as well. The next pattern we'll talk about has to do with 3 or more syllables, so 3+ syllable adjectives. An example would be remarkable. Remarkable. Quite a few syllables there. If you have a longer adjective like this, then you don't form the comparative by adding ER and the superlative by adding EST. What you do instead is you use more, this little word more, as well as most. So you would say more remarkable and most remarkable. The place where it really gets difficult, though, is with adjectives that are 2 syllables long. So if our adjective is 2 syllables long, then we can follow either this pattern, more and most, or we can follow the pattern ER and EST. And it depends on the adjective, which means that you really have to get used to how these adjectives are shaped in English. You can look them up in the dictionary to check, but a lot of times, you sort of have to rely on intuition and on being used to the language. So if we take, for instance, loving, which used to be a verb, right, but we can use it as an adjective, then we would say more loving and most loving. Most loving. You wouldn't necessarily say lovingest. But if you were to say zany, that one also has 2 syllables, then you would say zanier and zaniest, and that would be perfectly fine. So there we have the ER and the EST ending. The rule then, what we're seeing here is that with adjectives that are 1 syllable long, we simply add ER and EST. With 3 syllables, it's also pretty easy. We add more and most. And with 2 syllables, it kind of depends. And you sort of have to get used to that over time. Now, there's a bit more we can still say about adjectives because there are also some irregular adjectives. Irregular adjectives. And these don't follow the patterns that we have described. They have some very strange and unique patterns, and you kind of just have to memorize these over time. So a couple of examples here. We have bad is the positive form. Then we have worse is the comparative. And we finally have worst. That's the superlative. Another example would be little. And this one changes quite a bit as well. We have less. That's the comparative. And least, which is the superlative. And then finally, there are a few adjectives which don't have a comparative form. So these are what are called absolute adjectives. Absolute adjectives. There's not too many of these, but it's good to be aware of them. So if you take an adjective like dead, for instance, it'd be very difficult to say that somebody is deader or more dead than somebody else. You know, if you're dead, you're dead. Same kind of thing with unique. If you're unique, then that means there's just one of you. So how can, you know, somebody be more unique or most unique? That's a very awkward kind of adjective to put in the comparative form. Absolute adjectives are fairly rare, but they're worth watching out for. And for the most part, you just need to follow the rules that we've described above. And I'll just repeat them very quickly. One-syllable adjectives, look for ER and EST. Three-syllable adjectives, use more and most. And with two-syllable adjectives, it gets a little bit tricky, as we saw. That's it for comparison of adjectives.